5 days after my 43rd birthday, I had a mental breakdown. I nearly ended my life. And I grabbed a bottle of Xanax and I thought to myself, I could just down all of these and never wake up. As I was lifting that bottle to my mouth, an image popped into my mind. My two kids downstairs in the living room, running around the coffee table, laughing and playing the game Uno. That image stopped my arm from lifting that bottle to my mouth. We're supposed to put our heads down, bury our emotions, work hard, and provide for our families. What happens when you can't bury those emotions anymore? It's like shaking up a Pepsi bottle with the top on. That pressure, it needs to get released. Otherwise, it's just going to explode.
I think so many of us fall into the trap of following that script. Go to university, get a good job, be successful, own the house, have the car, chasing all of these material things, but not really pausing to ask, well, what do I want out of life? Is this the direction I want life to take? Or am I living someone else's life?
I ask these men, how many friends do you have? And on average, they usually say about 5 or 6. Then I ask, out of those 5, how many of those friends can you have a deep, emotional, heartfelt conversation with? Generally, the answer is 0, maybe 1.
If you're a man in midlife and you're starting to think more seriously about your health and strength, I've created a place for that. It's called the Midlife Mavericks Brotherhood. Now, this isn't another social media feed. There's enough noise out there already. The idea behind this community is simple: clarity, consistency, commitment, and accountability. Inside the Brotherhood, we focus on one thing first. Strength training is the gateway habit, because when a man starts training consistently, something shifts. Energy improves, sleep improves, confidence comes back, and you start showing up differently in the rest of your life. Inside the community, you'll find a free 2-day per week, ongoing monthly strength program to get you started. There's other coaching options if you want more structure, and a group of men walking the same path, supporting each other, sharing their wins, their struggles, and most importantly, their journey. There's also a video library and a classroom where I break down the fundamentals of training, nutrition, recovery, and long-term health in midlife. So if you're tired of all the noise and you just want a clear place to start, you'll find a QR code here and a link in the description. Midlife is an opportunity to take ownership of your health, happiness, and longevity. And it starts with strength training. So I hope to see you inside the Brotherhood.
I didn't truly understand really what it meant to be a man and to be a husband and to be a father. And when I hear myself say that, it sounds a little sad. But what I know now and the experience that I had growing up and in my marriage and in all of the years that has led to my 40-something-year-old life has informed me for now what I'm doing with the rest of this life. And that's not an easy story to tell. I'll be honest with you. And I've told it enough that I'm pretty comfortable explaining what happened to get me to this place. But I fully understand that I had to go through all of these things, again, like I said, in order to get where I am today. So to start, I'll dive right into it, is 5 days after my 43rd birthday, I had a mental breakdown. I nearly ended my life. And that started with an argument with my now ex-wife. It was pretty much a normal thing in my household. But something in me cracked. And I walked up into my bedroom, up these stairs, and I grabbed a bottle of Xanax, and I shook it, and I counted roughly about 25 pills inside. And I looked at that bottle and I thought to myself, I could just down all of these and never wake up. As I was lifting that bottle to my mouth, an image popped into my mind. It was of my 2 kids downstairs in the living room, running around the coffee table, laughing and playing the game Uno. That image stopped my arm from lifting that bottle to my mouth. It literally saved my life. Then the next thing I had to do after that was make one of the biggest decisions that I've ever made as a man. And that was to put myself in the hospital. So I called a friend and I had him come pick me up. And he took me to UCLA Medical Center. And I checked myself into the behavioral health unit. And I spent 5 days in the hospital. 2 days into that vacation, I'll call it, my wife came to visit me, not to offer support, but just to let me know that she was filing for divorce. So in that moment, I was what I thought was at my worst, my rock bottom. And when that happened, when she came to visit me, it was like a trap door opened and I fell even farther. Because for me, I grew up in a household that was a product of divorce. I describe it as sort of like I lived similar to Harry Potter in a walk-in closet in, just outside the normal part of my parents' house. And my stepmom and my dad, I had a younger brother who was my half brother. So I was sort of like the bastard redheaded child of the family. And that experience of how I grew up informed this really hard lesson that I was really struggling with. It was this idea that if I got a divorce, it was failure. That if I got a divorce, I was repeating the same childhood traumas that I grew up with and I was passing it down to my kids. So I was operating on this idea that if this happens, I'm failing. I'm failing as a parent. I'm failing as a man. I'm failing as a partner. And it took me a really long time to realize that 2 happy homes are far better than 1 toxic home. So I spent my 5 days in the hospital at UCLA. And then after that, the doctors had recommended that I go to a residential treatment center. And that's sort of kind of like rehab. But for me, it was more like what I like to call going to mental health college. Because while I was there, I spent 25 days in this men's only, treatment center. And every day from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days a week, we learned every hour on the hour, we learned a new modality of psychology. I learned DBT, ACT, CBT, EMDR. We learned about nervous system regulation, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, journaling, gratitude. And for whatever reason, I just leaned in. I got up every morning, I grabbed my notebook and my pen, and I went downstairs and I took notes and I saved every paper and I just absorbed everything. And after that 25 days, I came out of that experience with just a plethora of knowledge of why I felt the way that I felt. And I started to see how our subconscious mind works and how how we as men or people in general create these I like to call them like unclosed loops. And this is what creates in our mind is this loop of unprocessed trauma. And your nervous system and your subconscious wants to keep replaying that loop and until it gets closed. And then it can process it and move it away. So as I was coming back into normalcy and life, I just started noticing some of these like societal norms that just didn't sit right with me. And a lot of it had to do with masculinity and what the view of a man is supposed to be. You know, here in the States, there's this sort of old mantra that just is just so toxic, and it's really deeply embedded in a lot of men. And it goes like this. We're supposed to, how does it go? We're supposed to put our heads down, bury our emotions, work hard, and provide for our families. And that, the first question I had when I kind of was thinking about that is like, what happens when you can't bury those emotions anymore? Like, what do we do with that? You just have this pit in your stomach or in your, your hips or wherever it is. Eventually that's going to come up. And if we don't address that and look at it and face it, it's going to rear its ugly head again. It's like shaking up a Pepsi bottle with the top on. That pressure, it needs to get released. Otherwise, it's just going to explode. So that's what led me to devoting my life to helping other men, other people, and trying to change this societal view of what it is to really be a masculine man. And to understand that, like, we don't have to go at this stuff alone. Like, another kind of thing here in the States, and I'm sure it's probably similar in Australia as well, is that, the view of men is like, we have to do everything alone. That if you ask for help, you're considered weak. And that's just wrong. It's not, like, men need support. We all need support. You can't do anything alone. It's like playing sports. If you're playing basketball, you can't play 1-on-5. It takes a team. You have to have, the 5 other players on the team to actually win. And unfortunately, there's the view a lot of times with men is that they can't, or they don't know how to ask for help, or they're scared to ask for help, to be seen as weak, or that they can't handle their stuff. Like, oh man, like you need to ask for help. You don't need to do this alone.
It's costing us so much, isn't it? All over the world, we see the statistics and what that's doing to men's health, but it is sort of the masculine pressure that is put on our society and our culture today. I want to rewind, Aaron, before the part where you cracked open, and I want to go back to like those earlier years of you growing up. Obviously you mentioned that you're living with your dad and your stepmom and your half brother. I'm curious, did you see your father as a failure because he'd gone through divorce, or what was going on for you as a kid growing up in that family situation?
There are a lot of things that my dad taught me that I think were well, and there were a lot of things that my dad taught me that were just toxic. My dad wasn't a very present father. I would like to, I'd probably say that I learned more from my grandfather and would consider my grandfather more of a father figure than I would my dad. And unfortunately, both of my immediate parents are pretty emotionally immature. And, they tried to do their best with what skills they had. I just don't think that they had a lot of skills. And now looking back on the way that I grew up, like that really informs my parenting. But no, it was hard, man. I grew up, I had a lot of childhood trauma, and a lot of the work that I had done myself had to do with that mother wound or that father wound that I really had to process and really come to terms with the way that I grew up. And for me, I the way I kind of look at it is that I had to go through all of that trauma, all of that upbringing that I had. It's my job to experience all of that in order to shape who I am today and inform what I can do in this next stage of my life. Like I just really had to come to terms with, okay, I had to experience this because this is what's creating the man that I am today. And now I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna help other people through my own personal experience, because I know there's a lot of people that also had a childhood similar to I have and are struggling with that. And having someone like me who can tell my story and be able to show by example that I've overcome that trauma or those things that I grew up and have now excelling and living and honestly can say that I'm the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. Like, I think that carries a lot of weight. I mean, that's a lot of influence that can have on somebody who may be struggling.
I'm curious, like, to rewind, who do you think you were trying to be for the people around you when you were growing up? What was the role you were playing?
That is a great question. I've gotten really, really good at reading people. And I think when I was younger, I was sort of a chameleon because I could read somebody really well and be able to tell exactly what they needed in order to be happy or to be pleased. And I just that was a skill that was honed and trained as a child, because I grew up in an environment where I was walking on eggshells constantly. So being able to read my parents' like emotional, tense, or be able to see if they were angry or happy or whatever, and be able to shift how I reacted or responded in order to not get screamed at or beat or whatever it may be, like that's a honed skill. And now I use that in coaching, where I can read people's faces, and it's almost like I can pull emotions out of people before they even really understand that it's there, because I can see it in their face. It's almost like an intuitive type of a skill. But that, again, that comes from being that chameleon as a kid, being able to just shift and bob and weave and, respond in a way that just kept me from getting my butt kicked.
It sounds like a lot of fear and a lot of, like you say, chameleon. It's protection. You're hiding, not really showing your true self, but really just trying to protect yourself in the circumstances there. You've mentioned trauma a few times.
Yeah.
Growing up for you, what sort of trauma do you feel you faced that you're willing to share with us today?
A lot of emotional abuse, a lot of physical abuse. My stepmom was not the most kind person. And she said some things that were really, really hard. One of the quotes that I'll never forget. And this was like a mantra or a, sort of a guiding line that my stepmom always had. It came from like an 80s movie, and I don't remember I wish I knew the movie. But the quote or the line of the movie goes, is this older woman in the movie, and she says, "Sometimes being a bitch is all you have left to hang on to." And that was like my stepmom's like mantra. And that alone tells you a lot about how the environment that I grew up in. You know, when a person is just getting enjoyment out of being, you know, nasty to people. Another thing that really kind of got me, and I really like this story, is that I grew up playing basketball, and I loved basketball. I played at a pretty high level, and when I was in the 7th grade, 8th grade, somewhere around there, so middle school. I once heard my dad say that if I didn't get a basketball scholarship, I was never going to amount to anything. And that really just stuck with me. And the amazing thing out of that is that taught me about grit. And that gave me this level of grit that when I heard that hurt. But then there was something inside of me that was like, oh, that's what you think? Okay. I'm now going to try. I'm going to prove you wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, Michael Jordan in the movie, his documentary, I'm blanking on the name of it. But
yeah, I know the one. Yep.
He talked about having a chip on your shoulder and being able to take fuel from somebody, you know, thinking that he couldn't win another championship or that he wasn't worth the amount of money that they gave him. And he'd be like, okay, he goes, I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that on my shoulder. And that's going to be my fuel to overcome whatever adversity comes in front of me. And I'm going to go and I'm going to win 6, 7, or 8, however many championships he won. He used that as fuel to just overcome whatever obstacles. And that moment when my father said that is when I learned that chip on my shoulder. And having that grit to overcome adversity has gotten me to where I am today. And I put myself through college. In the very early part, I made the basketball team. I excelled completely just off of being like, oh, okay, I'm going to practice every single day now. And I'm going to prove you wrong that I can actually amount to something. College? Okay, great. You're not going to help me with college? Fine. I'm going to go put myself through college. I'm going to get 2 degrees now. Just because you said I'm not going to amount to anything. You know, and so I think that same kind of grit came when I had that mental breakdown. When I went to the hospital and I was like, oh, what is this? Like, I'm not happy in my life. Now that's just that other chip on my shoulder. Now I'm going to learn everything I can about my mental health. I'm going to learn everything I possibly can to overcome whatever this hurdle, this adversity, you know, that I'm facing right now. And I'm going to freaking beat it. And I'm going to be the best version of myself just out of just conquering this thing. So go ahead.
I think what you say there is something that a lot of men can relate to. Whether it's a comment that's come from their father, their grandfather, a teacher, someone maybe they looked up to, and they've told them that they might not amount to something or that they can't do something. And it does put that chip on the shoulder, and it does bring about that thought pattern of, what? I will prove you wrong. And although that helps us, you know, for this instance, you build grit, what does it cost you, do you feel, trying to prove your father wrong?
I mean, it costs a lot. It's definitely not, you know, necessarily a healthy like form, right? I think I was able to use it to get to a certain level in my life that I needed to. But what you're bringing up is a really great thing, is that like, once now I established myself in my life, I was married, I had kids, I had a blue collar job in the film industry. Now where's that grit go? where does that chip on the shoulder? Now there's an angst that's in me that now is starting to bleed out into my family, in my in my conversations or arguments with my wife or with, colleagues at work or whatever it may be. Like, I think that is where the downsides of that starts to come out, is not managing that angst or that energy that is pent up inside of me to settle. And it took me, several years to realize what that actually was, and how to, let go of any of that, and allow my nervous system to settle down and just freaking live. I don't have anything to fight for now. I fight for my kids, but, like, that's just being a dad and showing up. That's not really the fight.
It's that pressure, isn't it? I think growing up, sometimes that grit, or sometimes, that those stories we tell ourselves, it gives us that energy to show up for the fight, to be the warrior, to push, to strive, to prove someone wrong. And obviously it's got its benefits. It can help us get a good job, climb the corporate ladder, earn more money, chase the girl, win the prize,
Yeah.
be on the basketball team, whatever it is. But I like how you say, you get to that point in your life and it's like, okay, you've ticked all those boxes, and now what? You've still got that story that's telling you to push harder, to strive for more, but where is that leading you? And how do we reshape that belief? Or how do we actually start to realize what it's costing us in terms of, like you say, the nervous system and our health, our relationships? Like, what is the cost there? And it starts to show up maybe in ways that don't serve us anymore, and how it has. Fast forward now, like, you've given us a bit of an insight to your growing up and your family situation and the pressure that's put on you, the emotions that probably aren't being expressed, they're being buried. And now we're at the time, like, you're married, you've got kids, and it's leading up to this moment where, you cracked open. I'm just curious, in the weeks leading up to that, what's going on internally for you? What's unseen? What's below the surface?
I didn't know it at the time, but I had completely lost myself. When we talked about being the chameleon, I was still doing that. I had this realization after, in the hospital, that I had lost who I was. And I was living a life for somebody else. And that didn't sit right with me. And that was kind of unconsciously coming up in my conversations, in arguments, in, asking for things that I need and not getting them. And, I think it had a lot to do with, the downfall of my marriage. I mean, there were deeper things going on, between the two of us, but yeah, that loss of self, and having that realization, I was like, who am I? What do I love? And when do I need to start doing that? Because I'm not happy right now. I'm not living a life that is joyful to me. Somebody else might be getting joy out of it, and that's okay. And I just realized that I just had to let that go. And I think really, one of the main core things of truly being a man is knowing who you are and being able to be okay with letting everything else go in your life that doesn't align with who you are. It's a tough thing.
I think so many of us fall into the trap of following that script, growing up as a kid. Go to university, get a good job, be successful, own the house, have the car, chasing all of these material things, but not really pausing to ask, well, what do I want out of life?
Right.
Is this the direction I want life to take? Or am I living someone else's life, or trying to please other people, but not really slowing down to question, what are my values? who is the man I want to become? What is the future I want to hold? What was the story you were telling yourself? What was going through your head at that time?
At that time, I didn't want to be alone. I couldn't face my own childhood traumas, and I needed another person to help me fulfill that void inside my chest or my heart. And it wasn't and I think that really comes from is I didn't love myself, and I didn't know how to love myself. And I'm very fascinated with like inner child work. And I've done a lot of work in connecting with my own inner child. I had lost that connection with that inner child. And that little boy inside of me was really, really hurt. And I think what I was doing at the time was, I was sort of codependent in my relationship. I was, drowning my issues with alcohol and marijuana, and constantly just overworking, all in a way to sort of cope with the things that I wasn't really ready to face yet. And it wasn't until I stopped all of that and really looked into my own self and established that connection with that inner child and asked that little boy, like, what do you need? And that's when I saw a really profound change. That's when I started realizing who I actually am. I did this like really interesting meditation where this woman asked me, to think about all the things as a little kid. Who were your heroes as a kid? What were the things that you got really excited with? It could be, an action figure, a movie star, or whatever it may be. But like, what was that person or that thing that really lit you up? That's that connection to your inner child and your authentic self. And so in doing that, I started to just realize, like, what do I really like? Who really am I? What really, makes me tick or lights that fire underneath me, And once I started really looking into that, the real version of me, the authentic Aaron, started to really come out. And that chameleon, that role that I was playing, even in my marriage, started to fall away.
I want to step into that shortly, of where you've gone, how you've transformed and what's come from the results you've done. Before we get there, though, I want to touch a little bit on failure, because you talk about divorce being a failure. You failing if you go through divorce.
That was a story I was telling myself.
Yeah, exactly. What did failure mean back to you then? Like growing up, it sounds like, there's a lot of pressure on you to succeed. And obviously, as an adult, having kids, having a family, having the job, working in the film industry, at that time, what did failure mean to you?
To me, failure meant repeating all of those same things that I grew up. The childhood traumas that I had ran from, that I had escaped, that I had, used that grit to get away from, were just coming right back. Those same things getting placed on the shoulders of my kids and passing down that generational trauma onto them. That's what failure meant to me. And to be honest with you, there was a moment in my life where I thought I would rather end it than fail. And again, I go back to that moment when I saw that image of my kids, and it made me realize that I'm not actually failing. Is that all this work that I've done, even up to that point, I had done quite a bit of work, is already creating a life way better for my kids than I had experienced.
There can be a lot of fear around failure. And it's funny, isn't it? Because as kids, we're encouraged to fail. We're encouraged to participate, to try. But somewhere along the journey, especially for men, when we get to a certain age, I think failure is frowned upon, and we're fighting not to fail, trying to keep our head above water all the time. But then failure is the best teacher. And from that, that's where growth comes from. And it's a challenging thing for men to be able to step into that, because they would rather stay in certain misery where they feel comfortable than to step into the unknown and risk the chance of that failure. And I think it's something that is intertwined with masculinity today, is I don't fail. I keep pushing, and failure, I'm not allowed to fail. I'm not sure where that's come from, but I can say that I relate to that. And I've had the same chip on my shoulder in a different way growing up. And I appreciate you, Aaron, for sharing that story. One more thing I want to touch on there is, were you able to ask for help at that point? And if you were, did you have the people around you that could help you?
At that time, I called upon my friend to take me to the hospital. So that's one example of somebody who was there for me. But it really wasn't until I started getting into real men's work that I really started to understand what a support system was like. I have grown up single-handedly doing everything I possibly could to create a life for myself. And, just surviving as a lone wolf, so to speak, in life. So, asking for help is something that, I'll be honest with you, is still comes up for me in my life now. Like asking for support, I'm like, no, I could just do it myself. I can, but no, that's not you can ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. It's just such a foreign feeling to do,
Mm.
There's something that I just wanted to bring up with what you kind of said before. Is there's a quote that I absolutely live by that I think talks a lot about this. And the quote goes like this. It says, "Our minds will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven every single time." And, sometimes that familiar hell is, most of the time, that familiar hell is just easier. And it's what we've grown accustomed to. And I encourage people a lot to really look into what are their patterns? What is that familiar hell? And what's the unfamiliar heaven? And how do we make the heaven, which is unfamiliar, familiar?
I like that quote, mate. Thanks for sharing that. And it rings true for so many of us. Like I said, it's that certain misery. We stay here because we're comfortable, but to break free of that, and find that heaven that you're talking about, that uncertainty is something that challenges all of us. And that fear of failure, especially I feel for men.
It also shows up in so many ways. For me, I'm used to living in fight or flight, living in survival mode, having my nervous system just jacked through the roof constantly, because that's how I grew up. Constantly surveying, am I gonna, walking on eggshells? Am I gonna say something that's gonna cause my parent to beat the crap out of me or, yell at me? So, I navigated toward, I toward jobs that fueled that. I worked in the medical field in order to pay for university. And then after that, once I, got a degree in the film industry, then I went to the film industry and I picked the one job that you have to do live while it's filming. Why did I pick that job? Because my nervous system is used to that. And that's the familiar for me. and it's now taken a really long time to rework the nervous system and to live a life that isn't jacked into fight or flight.
Mm. Learning to switch off, mate. It's an easy thing to say, but not always the easy thing to do, isn't it?
Oh, it's so hard.
I want to zoom in quickly just to that moment that you described earlier. You talked about the moment, the image in your head of the kids running around playing, laughing, and playing. I want you to take us back to that moment for a little bit there. What do you feel that connected you to?
In that moment, I realized that I needed to push through to be a dad for my kids. That if I ended my life, that's gonna be far worse than anything that I would pass down to them. Growing up without a father is going to do far more damage. And that my kids deserve to have a present father. And that's really what led to my decision of like, okay, now I'm like, what do I do next? I have to go to the hospital. I'm not feeling right. There's something going on. I need to figure this out. And I need to go take some time and seek professional help.
In that second, what changed, do you think? Do you think it was love? Do you think it was responsibility? Was it guilt, purpose, something else?
I mean, my love of my kids for sure. There was probably some guilt, some fear, a lot of fear. Yeah. I love my kids and I love being a father. And I just could not imagine them having to grow up without a father.
Takes courage, mate, and bravery to do what you did. And yeah, I agree with you 100% what you're saying there. And that responsibility of being a dad and the emotions that brings up, um, it's got a power in itself. We were talking before the podcast about being a dad and the responsibility that is, but how much joy it can bring to us. And it sounds like that's what's, saved your life, and you're here with us today because you made that decision. I want to know how that affected you in terms of being a man and strength, because the definition of masculinity is to be strong. And for a long time, you were probably wearing a mask and pleasing other people, showing strength in a different way. So I'm curious, like, after you've gone through that experience, what do you think you had to unlearn about strength, or maybe relearn about strength?
I think I learned that strength comes in making hard decisions. That strength comes in picking myself up when I was at the lowest point. I said earlier that I I had to make the biggest decision I ever made as a man and to put myself in the hospital. That was that moment when I realized what real strength is making that hard choice. That shame, what I thought at that time was shameful choice, was really the biggest choice that I ever made, the biggest decision that I ever made that took more strength than any other time of lifting anything or, physical strength, like understanding that I need to go do something that's for the betterment of myself and for my family. That to me is strength.
The armor cracked, mate. The armor cracked. And luckily you had the courage and bravery to step into that and make the decision that you did make. And that is true strength, I think. And being able to admit that and talk about that openly, to show vulnerability, to admit that you were struggling, to admit that life wasn't going the way you wanted, to admit maybe that you were failing, but accepting that and accepting that for a greater reason for your kids. That's pretty incredible to hear that story. And I think a lot of men struggle with that sort of stuff because we are told to bury our emotions, to be strong, to hold the shield up, to hold the sword up, to keep fighting. But that's not true strength. And to have the courage to ask for help, to have the courage to put yourself in the hospital, to go through that, like that's a lot harder. That takes far more strength. But you're shining a light for others there to be able to admit that they need help or to ask for help, which is true bravery, man. I appreciate you sharing this story. I think it's definitely something a lot of men need to hear. How did that change your life on the other side of that? After you've gone through that experience, the hospital, the retreat, the recovery center, and you've come back out, like I think some men could easily slip back into the old routine, fall back into the old autopilot, back into, the known misery. What happened to you? How did you rebuild yourself?
I mean, I'm not going to say that it was all fairies and
Right.
easy things. Like, no, I definitely slipped back in at times to the old routine, but I learned so much about myself in those moments that it gave me an understanding of what my mind is doing and how I didn't have control over my own thoughts, that I was taking, our brains are crazy. It does crazy things, man, and being able to understand that I'm going to have crazy thoughts and that I don't have to actually act on them, and that isn't truth. That was the moment where I was like, okay. And that's when I started to get into mindfulness and meditation and just changing my routines. Like a really simple thing that I started doing is I, as a solo parent, or co-parent or whatever, I share my kids 50-50. I now get up at 5 a.m. and I go out and I sit on my front porch as the sun's coming up and I meditate for maybe 10 minutes. I usually listen to like an app, somebody guiding me, or I just have a timer and I journal and I just contemplate and I sit and I get my brain and my mind and my body all aligned before my kids wake up, before the sun is even all the way up. And then I can go start my day. And then my kids wake up and then it's lunches and breakfast and, getting out the door for school. And that may not work for everyone, but that worked for me. And that was a routine, a self-care routine or a, mindfulness routine that really just, it clicked for me. Another one that was like really big that I'm a big advocate of is gratitude journaling. I do it still today. There is science behind when you speak gratitude, saying positive thoughts, that it actually releases dopamine and serotonin into your brain, which are the feel-good hormones. You literally cannot be angry after saying something that you're grateful for because your brain won't allow it. Like you're filled with all of these like hormones that are the happy hormones. You can't be angry after that. So I went, over a good year process, I went from being an ultra pessimist, angry at the world, very, everyone's out to get me, to an optimist, and to a positive person who just thinks of positive things, the joy of life at all times. And it didn't take me that long. They say a routine becomes a habit after 21 days. It took me a little bit longer than 21 days. I got kind of a hard head, but I was able to do that. And that was a huge shift. Finding the joy in every little moment that has a massive effect on how you see the world and how you see your family, how you see your colleagues, how you see your friends, how you see the guy who cuts you off on the freeway, who knows what he's going on in his life. But, you could choose to get mad and be all upset and angry, or, understand that he may be in an emergency right now. Who knows, right? But I'm looking at that situation as like, well, there's still joy in this.
For a lot of men in midlife, we're loaded up with responsibilities. From the moment we get out of bed to the moment we go to sleep, whether it's family, whether it's kids, whether it's work, whether it's paying bills, the mortgage, getting the car fixed, there's all these things that are constantly on our plate, and we're just fighting fires. We're just constantly on the go. But when are we actually giving back? When are we prioritizing ourselves? When are we crafting that time to actually do the inner work a little bit, to sit with ourselves, to ask the big, powerful questions about what's important or what am I grateful for, to reflect on life and I suppose create a plan, an action of like, where am I leading and where am I following and what do I need to change right now? I just think it's so important. And for a lot of men, I think that time in the morning, like getting up early and having that morning ritual before the kids are out, before the chaos starts, before the noise, is just so important. Or whether it's the evening as well, our mornings and evenings are those special moments where maybe we can find some time for ourselves to recharge the system, to calm the nervous system, all the things, that you're talking about there. How has that changed you as a dad? Because I know that chatting you today, that being a father is so important to you. I mean, it's saved your life, but the transition from before, what you went through and who you are now, who is Aaron the dad now?
The first word that comes to mind is present. I'm a present dad. I'm involved. I lean in every aspect of my kids' life. I had this realization that when I was working in the film industry, we work really long hours. And I only, I get 50% of my kids' time. The other 50% of their time goes with their mom. And we live close by and but when I was working in the film industry, that 50%, I was getting up for work at 5 a.m. before the sun was up, and I was coming home, when they're still asleep. And then I was coming home at 10 o'clock at night after they're in bed. And I kind of had this realization of like, who's actually raising my kids? The babysitter? Because I'm not, because I'm at work all day. So, that was when I kind of realized I need to change my career. I need to change my life because my kids are far more important than some paycheck, working on some movie that nobody may ever see. And it's not that much money for all the work that we're putting in. And that's what kind of led me to, getting into coaching, getting into men's work, getting into, helping others. I just kind of realized that I could be a present father, and I could be of service to other people, and I could help shape and change how other people are living their lives while being a dad and, picking my schedule and, things like that. Like, that's kind of a no-brainer to me. So I just lean in. I really lean in. I'm involved in their school. I coach basketball. I, you know, take my kids camping. Like I give my kids these experiences they may never get. And I try to just be as present of a father and as kind and as, compassionate, and I think really for me, one of the biggest things is modeling these behaviors. I'm not telling my kids, hey, you need to be kind. I'm going out and being kind to other people, and they're seeing that. And that's what's having an effect on my kids. There was I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a man outside of my house that his car had broken down. And in the States, we have on my street, we have a street cleaner that it's like a machine that drives by. And, so it's one day is on this side and the other day is on this side. And this guy has this big, huge SUV and he's trying to push it to the other side, like by himself. There's another guy with him. And I just happened to be, cleaning dishes and looking out my kitchen window. And I noticed them struggling. And I put my shoes on. I ran outside and I went and helped him. Didn't ask, didn't say anything, just went and helped him. My kids freaked out and they were like, Dad, where are you going? And they sat on the front porch and they watched me helping this guy move. And the guy said, thank you. And I said, oh, you're welcome. No big deal. And I walked back in the house. And my kids asked me, they were like, well, why did you do that, Dad? I said, well, they needed help. These guys were struggling to move that car and they needed to move it. They needed an extra person to a little bit more muscle. Like, yeah, but you don't know them, Dad. I go, they're our neighbors. It doesn't matter if I know them or not. It's a person who's struggling and they need help. So I'm going to go help them. That happened 4 or 5 years ago. And my kids still tell that story. That's modeling kindness. And they're never going to forget that story. And I think that's what's going to shape my kids into being who they are. The kids that they, the kind children that they grow into adults, it is based around stories like that.
It's so true. It's being present with your kids. And it's like when I reflect back on growing up with my dad, what I remember most is the time we spent together, being present, tinkering away in the shed on the car or the motorbike. They're the most memorable moments of growing up. And I'm going through fatherhood now. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and it's like I think about that. I reflect on that. It's like, what memories do I want her to have? And how can I show up and create those memories? Because they're the most important thing. It's so tricky. We were talking about this, before the episode of stepping into the role of being a dad. Where's the instruction manual? We panic. It's like, how do we do this? I don't know how to bring up a child. I don't know what I need to do. Feeling a little bit lost. And it's one of the toughest experiences I think we go through as men, but also probably one of the most rewarding experiences if we can slow down and smell the roses and be more present with our kids. And it's so funny. I don't think until you've got kids, you just really don't know what you're about to go through and that journey. Earlier, you talked about your nervous system and you talked about, being in that state of fight and flight. And it's probably the protection mechanism for you, the way you grew up, the family, what's going on around you, the people pleasing, all that sort of stuff. I'm curious now, how do you control that anxious nervous system or that nervous system that's so used to go, go, go?
First thing is breathing, breath work. Understanding your breath, mindfulness. I know about myself that I'm a very physical person. I'm a former, I played basketball. I was an athlete, so I have to move my body. That in itself is processing whatever energy that need to jump into fight or flight. Physical exertion for me helps to calm that down. And then breathing, that's really, really what it is, was a big help for me. I'm also really interested in circadian rhythm and getting sunlight, on on my early morning sunlight in my eyes and sunset, in my eyes and on my skin. And there's something about connecting, with the earth and nature nature's the best medicine. It really is. I'm a big advocate. I'm a outdoors guy. I camp, I hike all the time. And there's something special about being connected with nature that just calms me. It may not be for everyone, but that's a big one for me.
It's
But
all
I
the
also think,
foundations.
oh, go
All the
ahead. I'm sorry.
foundations, all the simple things that, sometimes are just underrated. Sunshine, movement, exercise, fresh air, nature, and the huge impact that that can obviously have on our health and well-being. I love it.
Yeah, it's also like, and I kind of take this in my coaching, and I'd love to hear your thought about this. Is I kind of like, I just explained all these things that work for me, right? And I found these things that work for me, and they may not work for other people. And what I kind of do is it's all about that old Italian kind of saying of like how you tell if the spaghetti is done is by throwing the spaghetti up against the wall, and whatever sticks, that's when you know.
Yeah.
I take all these tools and all these things that I've learned over the past, and when I work with clients, it's like, let's throw spaghetti on the wall. Let's see what actually works for you. Because I believe that I could tell you all of the things that you should do. But if those things don't align, and you're not going to continue doing them. And, I think what it's all about is creating habits. So let's throw some spaghetti on the wall and let's see what sticks. It may be sitting for 5 minutes and journaling, or it may be putting your feet in cold water, or a pseudo cold plunge or something. Like there's all kinds of things out there in the world now to try. Let's figure out what things actually work.
I agree. It's about showing up as the guide and guiding men or guiding the clients in terms of where you're going to go in the direction that they want to take. I like to use the idea of like permission to experiment.
Yes.
You've got permission to experiment. And again, failure is growth. Fail and fail hard and fail fast. The faster you fail, the faster you learn. And the only way you're going to fail is if you're willing to experiment. So step into that, get uncomfortable. Where is the tension in your life? What are the things you've got to face? Move towards that tension, experiment with that tension, fail and fail again. I think that's the best way. And I think that's what we need to encourage men to do, because that is the best way for them to figure out, like you say, when does the spaghetti stick? What is the experiment that you run where you get some success?
Yeah.
So definitely. And again, we can share our journey, we can share our knowledge, and we can share our wisdom, and shine a light for others. But at the end of the day, your health, your well-being is your responsibility. No one else is going to step in and take ownership of that. You need to step up. You need to step in. You need to know your why, and head towards that. So I can definitely resonate with what you're saying there. I've got a couple more questions, mate, before we finish up.
Yeah.
And one now is about healthy masculinity. What does healthy masculinity mean to you now?
Healthy masculinity means, to me, is radical ownership for your actions. It means doing the work to look into yourself and to dig deep into that uncomfortability, to connect with that hurt child inside of you. I'm a really big fan of, are you familiar with John Wineland? He wrote this great book called From the Core. And, his version, and I've really adapted this, is his version of like healthy masculinity within a relationship is pretty phenomenal. And it's the idea that, as a man or a masculine man, it's our job to build the frame of the house. and then allow our partner to then, in their feminine, decorate the house, right? Within building that frame is kind of comes masculine leadership. You're leading your partner into this frame of this house that you have created. And that frame is taking ownership with what you're willing to take on yourself, what behavior you're willing to allow or not allow. And that doesn't sound, that sounds a little misogynistic the way I said it right there. But what I'm kind of talking about is like, there's a way to have conversations that doesn't need to be, nuclear or blown up. Like, you can have a calm conversation and be like, hey, listen, I don't really appreciate the way that was. Or, leading and being decisive. Like, that's a really great quality for a masculine man. Like, if you're, every woman, if you're dating and you're a man, like, all you really have to do is say, hey, we're going to go here. I'll pick you up at this time. How does that feel for you? 99% of the time, that woman's going to be like, yes, thank you. Because you're being decisive, right? Or she might say, you know what, that restaurant doesn't work for me. Then I would say, okay, that's amazing. How about this restaurant? Or what restaurant would you like to go to? She says, whatever restaurant. Great, I'll pick you up at 7. That to me is like, that's a healthy masculine man, taking leadership, being decisive, but including that person, that interaction in the choice. You don't have to make all the choices. You can ask, you can have a conversation about it, but that decisive tone or that decisive kind of like, great, I'll pick you up at 7. That is leadership. That's taking the lead in this interaction, in this role.
I like the analogy of the frame of the house. I think it's important to have that structure, support, the words that come to mind, protection, the boundaries, but also, you've got to have the flexibility. And I think a lot of men maybe struggle in their relationships, especially when kids are involved and, circumstances change and we fall into that role of being the provider, maybe being the yes man. And it's tricky to navigate out of that. But I like how you talk about leadership there as well. You're working with a lot of men around connection and leadership. What do you think men in midlife are really searching for?
Themselves.
Good answer.
I think that, it's I think that when we get into the midlife, into our older years, we lose sight of who we really are. Because we're, being the yes man, we're providing, we're grinding, we're hustling, and we forget who we are and what joys and needs that we have. Also, I think, support and friendships. I've been running this poll. This is my own little private poll in the men that I work with. And, guys who are 35 to into their 40s, anywhere around there, I ask, these men, how many friends do you have? And on average, they usually say about 5 or 6. I said, okay, maybe less. Some of them have even less. Then I ask, out of those 5, how many of those friends can you have a deep, emotional, heartfelt conversation with? Generally, the answer is 0. Maybe 1. So I think as we get older, fostering friendships and the work that comes into continuing to grow those friendships gets lost somewhere. Gets lost in the hustle, gets lost in the family life, gets lost in the, in the just life. Working all day, coming home, being a present father, and, friendships are, in my opinion, a part of self-care. And that's something that, is really incredibly important. If you're not taking time, a little bit of time to yourself to refill your cup, how can you bring your best self to your family? And I think having bonding time and having friends that you can, rely on, have those tough conversations with, go do things, with camping, outdoors, whatever, golfing, whatever it may be, is incredibly important, especially for guys in midlife, because it's something that's really lacking. Now, I want to be clear. I don't want to say that. I don't want to give this to be like a green light to like go off for 7 hours and play golf with your buddies and get drunk. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is spending intentional time to refill your own cup and to have to enjoy and connect with your friends, so then you can show up as a better partner to your to your wife or whatever, your better partner, or to your children, because you're not running on empty.
Yeah, so much so. I mean, the statistics in Australia are pretty bad too. I think it's like 1 in 5 men say that they've got no close friends. I think it's worse for men in midlife. Like, the older we get, we drift, we lose contact with our mates. And because of work and family and responsibilities, we don't craft out that time to check in with our mates. We expect them to always be there, and most of them are, but we just don't keep those connection channels open. And I think loneliness, it's on the rise. The correlation between loneliness and chronic disease, depression, cardiovascular disease, poor sleep, substance abuse, all those sort of things are up there. I think that's where men are really struggling. We're really struggling with that connection. As men, we've already had this conversation. It's like, it's hard to ask for help. It's hard to admit that you're failing. It's hard to be vulnerable and talk about your emotions or your struggles. We see that in the suicide rates of men all over the world. And it's something that, we need to change. And it starts with conversations like this, Aaron. And I appreciate, everything
Yeah.
you've shared today. More men need to hear these conversations, and hopefully it helps them to be able to reach out to a mate, connect, do the inner work on themselves, all the things that we've chatted about. Mate, at the end of the podcast, I'm doing this new thing. I'm trying it out. It's 5 questions. They're like filterless prompts. I'm just going to throw 5 things at you, and I just want you to share with me what comes to mind for you when I throw these 5 things at you.
Let's do it.
Number 1, what truth did you have to admit before your life could change?
That I'm okay being alone. That I can love myself.
Number 2, what are you done pretending about?
Mm. Gosh, I'm done pretending to be somebody that I'm not. I'm leaning into my authentic self and who I am. And to be honest, that goofy person, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm just being me.
Authentic. It's a hard thing these days, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Number 3, what does your nervous system still try to protect you from?
My nervous system wants to just go to war. It is so used to just living in that ultra focused action, fight or flight. I joke that, had I chose to be in the military, I would have been a phenomenal soldier. Um, yeah.
It sounds like you still rate yourself or score yourself on your success, on achievement, on still trying to tick that box. Would you say that's true?
My nervous system wants to. It wants to really like quickly jump into that because it's so familiar, you know? And so for me, it's like, yeah, I like to check those boxes, but I try to lean into doing less. I try to lean into breathing more and understanding when my nervous system wants to just jump and release that adrenaline and, you know, and allowing myself to just like breathe that and calm that down.
Circles back beautifully, mate, what you just said. It's the whole productivity versus presence. And it's you trying to be more present and be in the moment.
Yes.
Number 4, what is the cost of suffering in silence?
I mean, that nearly cost me my life. And I think, you know, the rate of suicide these days, it's nearly costing a lot of men their lives. One of the biggest things that I really want to instill in people in doing these interviews and telling my story is that you don't have to do it alone. That it is okay to ask for help. It is more manly and strong to ask for help than it is to suffer in silence.
What do you want your kids to feel in your presence that you never felt growing up?
Love, joy, love, so much love, and a safety in just being loved.
Sounds like you're the man who's starting to show up for that, mate. And your kids are very lucky to have you. Keep doing the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Before we finish up, is there any question I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
Hmm. I don't know. I thought this was a great interview. I can't think of anything right now. I mean, we hit all the points.
Mm. Enjoyed it, mate. It's been great to connect with you on such a deep level and have such a deep conversation. It's where I want the podcast to go, and it's guests like you who are willing to show up and share this in your story that is so powerful. I'm truly grateful. If men want to find out more about what you do, Aaron, where can they go?
My website is aarongambel.com. It's AARONGAMBEL.com. I'm also pretty active on TikTok at Aaron Gambel and Instagram. I write occasionally on Substack. You can find me there. Yeah.
Awesome,
Those are
mate.
the
I'll throw all the
spots.
links. I'll throw all the links in the show notes below. Thanks again. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation.
What struck me most about this conversation with Aaron is how many men are quietly living inside the same pattern, working hard, providing for their families, trying to hold everything together. But somewhere along the way, they lose themselves. Aaron's story reminds us that strength isn't pretending everything is fine. Strength is making the hard decisions in both the good times and the bad. Strength is asking for help. Strength is choosing presence over performance. And for a lot of men in midlife, that might be the most important shift they ever make. If this conversation resonates with you, I invite you to come and join us inside the Midlife Mavericks Brotherhood, where men are having these conversations openly and doing the work together. Before you go, I want you to sit with these questions. Where in your life are you still performing strength instead of living it? What emotions have you been burying for years? And who in your life actually knows what you're going through right now? Thanks for tuning in to the Midlife Mavericks podcast. I'll see you next time.